The library carried the faint scent of old paper and polished wood, a haven where Isla Munro had spent most of her 26 years. Her fingers brushed the spine of a worn copy of Pride and Prejudice, its pages softened by countless hands. Life in the small town of Willow Creek moved at a gentle pace, and Isla blended into it like a quiet melody, easily overlooked, yet impossible to replace. She was the librarian who knew every book, the girl who smiled at children during story hour, the one who had never left town, never been kissed, never been in love. A late bloomer, her mother had once said, though lately Isla wondered if she'd ever bloom at all. Her life was simple and predictable, until the evening her father stumbled through the oak doors of the library, pale and red-eyed. "Isla," he rasped, clutching the counter, "we're in trouble." She closed the book she'd been sorting, her stomach twisting. "What did you do?" He couldn't meet her eyes. "Debt. It's piled up. I thought I could win it back." "Gambling. Bets?" His voice cracked. "They're going to take the house." Isla's heart sank. She knew about her father's gambling, the late nights at the bar, the promises to stop. But this? Losing the house? The little home she grew up in, where her mother's lavender garden still bloomed? It was all they had left. "How much?" she asked, her voice steady despite her trembling hands. 50,000, he whispered, "and there's no way out. Unless—" "Unless what?" Her tone sharpened. He finally looked up, guilt carving deeper lines into his face. "Damien Blackwell." The name swept through the room like a cold wind. Everyone in Willow Creek knew Damien Blackwell, even if few had ever seen him. A billionaire CEO who had risen from nearby roots, now a ghostly presence in their small world. A name murmured in tales of ruthless deals and an icy heart. He owned half the county's land, the factories, the loans. Why would someone like him care about her father's debts? "He agreed to wipe it all clean," her father went on, his voice barely audible. "The house, the loans, everything. But he wants something in return." Isla's throat tightened. "What does he want?" Her father's eyes dropped to the floor. "You. He wants you to marry him." The trip to the city felt like a dream, the kind where you're falling and can't scream. Isla sat in the back seat of a sleek black car, hands clenched in her lap as the countryside blurred past. Her suitcase held only a few things, a couple of dresses, her favorite books, a photo of her mother. She wore the nicest outfit she owned, a cream blouse and a long skirt, her chestnut hair clipped loosely. She felt like a lamb being led to slaughter. The lawyer beside her, dressed in a razor-sharp suit with an even sharper gaze, handed her a folder. "The contract," he said. 6 months. You'll be Mrs. Blackwell in name only. After that, you're free, and your father's debt is gone." She opened the folder, her hands trembling. The words danced before her eyes. Marriage, confidentiality, no emotional involvement. A transaction, cold and exact, like purchasing a car or a house. Only this time, she was the commodity. "Why me?" she asked, her voice soft but firm. "He could have anyone." The lawyer's lips twitched, not quite a smile. "Mr. Blackwell doesn't explain his decisions. Sign here." She hesitated, pen hovering above the paper. Her father's broken, desperate face flashed in her mind. The house, her mother's lavender garden. She signed. The Blackwell estate loomed like a fortress of glass and steel, perched on a hill overlooking the city. Isla's breath caught as the car stopped. She had expected wealth, but this was something else. Opulence with the weight of a warning. The driver opened the door and she stepped out, clutching her bag like a shield. Inside, the main hall resembled a cathedral made of marble and crystal, her footsteps echoing in the silence. A woman in a sharp suit appeared, her expression unreadable. "Miss Munro, I'm Claire, Mr. Blackwell's assistant. Follow me." Isla nodded, her heart pounding. The contract was signed, the deal was done, but nothing could have prepared her for this moment. She was led into a study lined with books she would have loved to explore under different circumstances. Instead, she stood still, waiting for the man who had just purchased her future. The door opened and Damien Blackwell walked in. He was taller than she expected, broad-shouldered, with a presence that seemed to draw all the air from the room. His black hair was slicked back, his suit impeccable, but it was his eyes that stopped her, gray, cold, like a winter sky before a storm. He looked at her, not with curiosity or warmth, but with the detached appraisal of someone inspecting a product. "Miss Monroe," he said, voice deep and clipped, "I trust you understand the terms." She swallowed hard, forcing herself to meet his gaze. "Yes." "Good." He moved to the desk, picking up a pen like he was already dismissing her. "The wedding is tomorrow. Claire will handle the arrangements. This is a business arrangement, nothing more. Don't expect affection and don't complicate things." Her cheeks flushed, not from shame, but a flicker of defiance. "I didn't choose this," she said quietly, "but I'll honor the agreement. Just don't expect me to pretend I'm happy about it." For a moment, something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, maybe, or something deeper. Then it vanished, replaced by his icy mask. "Fair enough," he said. "We understand each other." He turned away and Isla was let out, her heart a storm of fear and resolve. She was a bride, but not the kind she'd dreamed of as a girl. Tomorrow she'd marry a stranger, a man who saw her as a contract, not a woman. Yet as she glanced back at the office door, she couldn't shake the feeling that she glimpsed something in Damian Blackwell's eyes. Something not quite as soulless as he wanted her to believe. The city glittered with lights, but to Isla, it felt like stepping into a cold cave. The car carried her down wide avenues, past towering skyscrapers that shimmered like distant stars. She sat still, wrapped in a pristine white wedding gown that hugged her slender frame, a sheer veil blurring the fear in her brown eyes. The dress wasn't her choice. Claire, Damian's assistant, had delivered it that morning along with a brief message. "Mr. Blackwell wants everything perfect." Perfect for whom, Isla wondered, when her heart felt like it was sinking in stone. The wedding hall was a masterpiece of extravagance. Vaulted ceilings, glittering crystal chandeliers, white roses arranged in arching blooms. But there were no friends, no family, only a small group of strangers, lawyers, a few of Damian's staff, and a photographer hired to capture this staged, happy moment. Her father wasn't there. He had called that morning, voice choked with apology, but Isla had cut him off. "I'm doing this for you. Don't make it harder." She didn't want to hear excuses. She stood in front of a tall mirror in the waiting room, trying to breathe evenly. The reflection staring back looked foreign, cheeks softly flushed from makeup, lips tinted with pale red, brown hair swept into an elegant updo. She looked like a bride, but felt like a puppet. A knock startled her. Claire entered, expression as emotionless as ever. "It's time, Miss Monroe." Isla nodded and stepped out, her heels clicking against the marble floor. A soft violin melody began to play, but it couldn't calm the storm inside her. When the chapel doors opened, she saw Damian standing at the end of the aisle, stoic in a black tuxedo. He didn't smile, didn't look at her with even a trace of welcome. He just stood there, like a statue waiting. She walked, each step heavier than the last. The eyes of strangers glanced at her, but she focused only on not stumbling. When she reached him, Damian extended his hand, and she placed hers in his. His palm was strangely warm in stark contrast to his cold gaze. "Let's get this over with," he murmured, low enough that only she could hear. The ceremony unfolded like a well-rehearsed play. The vows were recited mechanically, devoid of feeling. "I, Damian Blackwell, take you, Isla Monroe, to be my lawful wife." His voice was deep, even, emotionless. Isla repeated her vows, her voice trembling slightly but clear. When the officiant declared them husband and wife, Damian placed a brief kiss on her forehead, a gesture more ritual than romantic. The small crowd clapped, but the sound rang hollow. The reception was no warmer. A long table overflowed with lavish dishes, but Isla only sipped a glass of water, her stomach tied in knots. Damian sat beside her, chatting with lawyers and business associates as if she didn't exist. She watched him from the corner of her eye, the way he tilted his head while listening, the way his fingers tapped lightly on the table, like he was counting down the seconds until he could leave. He didn't look at her, not once. Then a waiter accidentally spilled wine on her dress. Isla stood up, apologizing with a faint smile, though her insides were in chaos. She walked toward the restroom trying to blot the stain, but the expensive gown now bore a deep red blotch. When she turned around, Damien was there. He had removed his jacket, and for the first time, his eyes lingered on her for more than a few seconds. "You don't have to apologize for someone else's mistake," he said, his voice low but not entirely cold. He held out his jacket. "Cover it up. Don't let them see." Isla blinked, caught off guard by the gesture. She draped the jacket over her shoulders, the scent of his cologne, sandalwood and a hint of mint enveloping her. "Thank you," she said quietly, but he had already turned away, heading back to the table as if nothing had happened. At the end of the evening, as they walked out to the car, Damien spoke, his voice dry. "This is just a transaction, Miss Monroe. Don't expect anything more. I'm not the kind of man who loves, and I don't need you pretending to love me." Isla clutched the edge of his jacket, pride flickering like a small flame. "I don't intend to pretend," she replied, meeting his eyes. "But I'm also not the kind of person you get to belittle. If this is a deal, I'll uphold my end. But don't think I don't have dignity." For a brief moment, Damien's eyes flickered. Surprise, perhaps, or a reluctant hint of respect. He said nothing, just gave a slight nod and opened the car door for her. As the vehicle pulled away, carrying them toward his estate, Isla looked out the window, her heart pounding. She didn't know what the next 6 months would hold, but she knew one thing. Damien Blackwell might think he held all the power, but she was no pawn to be moved at will. The Blackwell estate was cloaked in darkness, save for the dim golden glow of wall sconces lining the long hallway. Isla stood before the door to the master bedroom, clutching the hem of the white silk nightgown Claire had prepared. The delicate fabric clung to her body, leaving her feeling more exposed than she ever had. Her heart pounded, each beat a sharp reminder of what might await her tonight. She was Damien Blackwell's wife, on paper, but the contract didn't specify whether that title came with marital obligations. She drew in a deep breath, willing herself to stay calm. She had imagined this moment 100 different ways. Damien coldly demanding she do her duty, or worse, ignoring her entirely like he had during the reception. Whatever happened, she was determined not to crumble. She hadn't chosen this marriage, but she could choose how to face it. The door creaked softly as she pushed it open. The room was vast, with a king-size bed draped in black silk, a fireplace crackling gently, and a large window overlooking the glittering city below. Damien stood near the window, his back to her, still wearing the white shirt and dress pants from the ceremony, his sleeves rolled up, revealing strong forearms. He didn't turn around immediately, but Isla could sense the tension in his posture, like a caged animal barely in check. "You came," he said, his voice deep and emotionless. Finally he turned, his gaze brushing over her, pausing briefly on the nightgown before looking away. "Sit. We need to be clear about a few things." Isla walked to the armchair near the fireplace and sat down, hands clasped tightly in her lap to hide the tremble. "About what?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Damien moved closer, stopping a few feet away. His gray eyes were cold, yet something flickered behind them, as if he were wrestling with himself. "I don't want any misunderstandings. This is a transaction, and I expect it to remain clear. I don't need you to do anything but show up when required, stay quiet about the contract, and don't cause trouble." She nodded, though a feeling of injustice stirred inside her. "I understand, but if you think I'm going to cling to you or use your money, you're wrong. I'm not that kind of woman." He raised an eyebrow, the corner of his mouth twitching. Not quite a smirk. "Good. I've dealt with enough of that type." He stepped a little closer, studying her. "But you're different, or you're very good at pretending." "I'm not pretending," Isla replied, her voice sharper than she intended. "I just want to survive the next 6 months, keep my promise to my father, and leave." Damien was silent, his eyes locked on hers. Then unexpectedly, he sat in the chair opposite her, separated only by a small table. "Then tonight," he said, his tone low, "we should set boundaries. I don't want you to feel pressured into anything." Isla blinked, caught off guard. She had braced herself for a cold, demanding Damien, but these words left her disoriented. She inhaled slowly and chose to be honest. I've never. She stopped, her cheeks burning, then forced herself to continue. I've never been with anyone like that. If you want to, I won't resist. But don't do it out of obligation. I don't want that. Her words hung in the air, and for a moment the room held its breath. Damien stared at her, eyes widening slightly, a flicker of shock passing over his face before he masked it. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees as if trying to decipher her. You're telling the truth, he murmured. Not a question, but a realization. She nodded, unable to meet his eyes. I'm not lying. Silence stretched between them, broken only by the crackle of the fire. Then Damien stood and approached her. Isla tensed, heart pounding, but he merely stopped in front of her, looking down with an expression she couldn't read. Go to bed, he said hoarsely. I won't touch you. Not tonight. Not out of duty. She looked up, startled. But the contract doesn't say I have to force you, he cut in, his voice firm but not angry. He turned toward the bed, stripping off his shirt and tossing it onto a chair. You sleep on the left. I'll take the right. Don't cross the line. Isla stood, her legs trembling slightly as she made her way to the bed. She pulled back the covers and lay down, her body taut with nerves. Damien turned off the light, and darkness filled the room, save for the soft glow of the fireplace. She heard him settle onto the mattress, a comfortable distance away, his breathing steady, but not relaxed. She lay there, eyes wide open, waiting for him to change his mind, to speak harshly, to do anything. But nothing happened, only silence. And gradually his breathing slowed, deepened. She turned her head, peering into the shadows. He was lying on his side, facing away from her, but his posture was no longer rigid. He was asleep. Isla closed her eyes, trying to quiet the storm inside. She had braced for a night filled with fear, but instead Damien had given her something she hadn't expected. Safety. As she drifted towards sleep, one thought surfaced, that tonight, for the first time in years, Damien Blackwell might have found rest too. Morning light filtered through the silk curtains, casting a pale glow across the polished hardwood floor of the master bedroom. Isla woke up with her body stiff from a night spent sleeping tensely, as if afraid to cross the invisible line Damien had drawn. She glanced to the right side of the bed. Empty. The blankets were neatly folded, no sign of Damien, as though he'd never been there. The clock on the nightstand read 7 a.m., but his absence made the room feel colder than the soft sunlight. She sat up, the silk nightgown slipping from her shoulder, and instinctively pulled it back up, though no one was there to see. The Blackwell estate was quiet, with only the faint sound of birdsong drifting in from the garden outside. Isla stood, choosing a simple light blue dress from her suitcase, determined not to let this luxurious place consume her. If she had to live here for 6 months, she'd find a way to make it feel just a little like home. The kitchen was at the end of the hall, a modern space with marble countertops and gleaming appliances Isla had never seen before. She opened the fridge and was surprised to find it fully stocked. Fresh vegetables, meats, cheeses, as if someone had known she'd be coming. Claire, most likely. Isla gave a small smile, grateful for the thoughtfulness, even if it came from someone simply following orders. She began cooking, a familiar act that calmed her nerves. The scent of toast and fried eggs filled the air, and she brewed a pot of Earl Grey tea from a box she'd found in the cupboard. As she was setting breakfast on the table, she heard footsteps. Damien appeared in the doorway, already dressed in a crisp suit, his hair still damp from a shower. He paused, his eyes flicking over her and the table, a flicker of surprise crossing his face before he masked it. "What are you doing?" he asked, voice deep but not harsh. Isla set the plate down, trying to remain casual. "Breakfast. I thought maybe you'd want something before heading to work." He raised an eyebrow, stepping into the kitchen, though he didn't sit. "I don't eat breakfast at home. Someone handles that at the office." "Oh." Isla felt her cheeks warm, but shrugged, masking the awkwardness. "Then I'll eat alone. No problem." Damien looked at her for a moment, as if weighing something. Then he turned to leave, but before disappearing down the hallway, he said, "Don't overdo anything. Claire will show you how this place works. His tone was flat, but there was something, just a hint of concern, that Isla wasn't sure she imagined. The days that followed settled into a strange rhythm. Damien left before she woke and came home late, usually when she was already reading in the study or tending to the backyard. The estate was so large that they rarely crossed paths, and when they did, he offered only a nod or a few clipped words. Isla didn't push conversation. She didn't want to intrude or seem like she was trying to win him over. Instead, she found joy in the little things. The garden became her sanctuary. It had been neglected, weeds overtaking the flower beds. But Isla didn't mind. She pulled weeds, watered, and planted lavender seeds she'd brought from Willow Creek. Each afternoon, she sat beneath the oak tree, reading or journaling, trying to hold on to herself in this unfamiliar world. She also started cooking regularly, always leaving a portion in the fridge for Damien, though he never touched it. One evening, while Isla was baking cookies after a long day in the garden, she felt dizzy. The room swayed, and before she could steady herself, she collapsed to the floor, the mixing bowl crashing beside her. When she came to, she was lying on the living room sofa, a blanket over her. Damien sat across from her, his jacket off, his expression filled with worry, a rare replacement for his usual cold mask. "What happened to you?" he asked, his voice tense. "Claire found you passed out in the kitchen." Isla sat up, her head still buzzing. I was just tired. I spent all day in the garden and probably forgot to drink water." He frowned, stood and turned, not to leave, but to grab a glass from the table. He handed it to her. "Drink this, and don't let that happen again. You don't have to act like a maid." She took the water, surprised by his concern. "I'm not doing it out of obligation," she said softly. "I like taking care of the garden. It makes me feel peaceful." Damien looked at her, and something in his gaze softened. "Peaceful," he repeated, as if the word was foreign to him. He didn't say more, but as he left the room, he paused at the doorway. "There'll be a doctor here to check on you in the morning. Don't argue." Isla nodded, her heart beating a little faster. When he disappeared down the hallway, she looked down at the glass in her hands, feeling as if a small door had opened between them. Damien Blackwell, the man with the frozen reputation, had been worried about her, even just a little. And in that moment, Isla realized she didn't just want to survive the next 6 months. She wanted to understand him, even if just a little bit. Rain fell gently against the windows, drops streaking down the glass and blurring the city lights. Isla sat in the mansion's reading room, a copy of Jane Eyre open on her lap, but her eyes no longer followed the words. Her thoughts drifted, lost in recent days. The brief moments when Damien's gaze lingered on her longer than necessary, or the deep timbre of his voice when he ordered her to rest after her fainting spell. Something was shifting, slowly, like water wearing away stone. But she didn't dare hope, not with a man like Damien Blackwell. She stood, set the book on the table, and walked into the hallway. The estate was quiet, filled only with the sounds of rain and her soft footsteps on the wooden floor. Damien wasn't home. He rarely was in the evenings, and Isla had grown used to his absence. But tonight, something tugged at her, an odd urge, as if the house itself was whispering, beckoning her to explore the parts of it she hadn't yet touched. She stopped in front of a door at the end of the hall. Claire had once referred to it as Damien's private quarters. It wasn't locked. After a moment's hesitation, Isla pushed it open. The room was smaller than she expected, almost modest compared to the rest of the opulent estate. A worn wooden desk, a bookshelf filled with hardbound books, and a leather armchair near the window. Nothing here matched the Damien she thought she knew, the cold man in sharp suits, but hinted at another version of him, someone she hadn't met. She approached the desk, her fingers brushing a picture frame lying face down. She knew she shouldn't, but curiosity overruled her. She flipped it over and found a photo of a young woman, blonde, smiling radiantly like sunlight. Behind her stood Damien, younger, his eyes not yet touched by frost, one arm wrapped around her shoulders. Isla felt a pang in her chest, not jealousy, but a sudden aching sadness. He had once been happy, once loved. What had turned him into the man she knew now? She set the frame down, feeling like she'd intruded on something sacred. Turning away, her eyes landed on a small wooden box on the desk. The lid was slightly ajar, revealing a folded piece of yellowed paper. She hesitated, but her hand moved on its own, lifting the page. Handwritten words appeared, firm strokes laced with raw emotion. My love, I don't know how to keep living without you. The accident. It was my fault. I was driving. I wasn't watching the road. If I could trade my life to bring you back, I would. I'm sorry, Elena. I'm sorry for destroying us. Isla read the letter, breath catching in her throat. The paper trembled in her hands. Damien had lost someone he loved, and he blamed himself. An accident. Elena. The pieces began to fall into place, explaining the icy walls he had built around his heart. She carefully folded the letter and returned it to the box, but the weight of it stayed with her. The next day, Isla stood in the garden, soft sunlight filtering through the trees. She held a small bouquet of freshly picked lavender, its scent gentle and comforting, reminding her of her mother and peaceful days in Willow Creek. She looked toward Damien's office window, where she knew he was working. Without thinking too much, she went inside, found a small vase, placed the lavender inside, and set it in front of his door. No note, no explanation, just a quiet gesture, a wordless comfort. That evening, when Damien returned, he paused at the door to his study, his eyes falling on the purple bouquet. He stood there for a long moment, his hand lightly brushing the petals. No one saw it, but the corner of his lips curved, just slightly, a faint, almost involuntary smile for the first time in years. He knew it was Isla. Only she, the quiet woman who had drifted into his life like a breeze, would have done this. He didn't say anything, didn't seek her out to thank her. But when he picked up the vase and carried it into his office, he placed it beside the face-down photo of Elena. Meanwhile, Isla lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, torn with conflicting emotions. She knew she was starting to care about Damien, not because of the contract, not out of gratitude, but because she saw the broken pieces inside him, pieces she longed to help mend, even just a little. But she was afraid she was just part of a transaction, that the 6 months would pass and she would walk away with a shattered heart. She closed her eyes and whispered to herself, "Don't fall for him, Isla. Don't." But deep down, she knew it was already too late. The morning in the Blackwell estate felt different, as if the air had softened ever so slightly after Isla left that bouquet of lavender outside Damien's door. She didn't mention it, and neither did he. But that morning, when Isla went to the kitchen to brew tea, she found a box of chocolate chip cookies on the counter, along with a small handwritten note. "Thank you." She smiled, her fingers brushing the strong, slanted handwriting. Her heart skipped a beat. It was the first time he left any sign of his presence, a small gesture, yet enough to make her wonder if the wall between them was beginning to crack. The day passed quietly. Isla spent time in the garden, tending to the newly blooming flower beds. But as the sun dipped toward the horizon, Claire appeared, holding a large silver-wrapped box. "Mr. Blackwell has requested that you get ready for tonight," she said, her voice as even as always. "A charity gala. He wants you to accompany him." Isla blinked in surprise. "Me? But why?" She had never attended any event with Damien before, and the thought of a room full of strangers sent a ripple of anxiety through her. Claire shrugged and set the box on the table. "He didn't say. Open it. I'll help you prepare." Inside was a white dress, simple but elegant. The silk hugged her figure softly, with a tasteful V neckline and a skirt that flared gently. Not flashy, but beautiful in a pure, understated way, as if chosen specifically for her. Isla slipped into the dress and stood before the mirror, feeling like someone else. Claire styled her hair in a low bun, leaving a few strands loose, and applied soft makeup that brought out her brown eyes and fair skin. When Isla looked at her reflection, she no longer saw the small-town girl from Willow Creek. She saw a woman, still herself, but stronger, more assured. As she descended the stairs, Damien was waiting in the foyer. He wore a black tuxedo, sharp and refined as ever, but when he saw Isla, he froze. His eyes swept from her hair to her sparkling shoes, then paused on her face, his gray gaze briefly lighting up before he turned away, masking whatever he felt. "You're ready," he said dryly, but his hand lingered for a moment when he opened the car door for her. The gala was held in a luxurious hotel ballroom, glittering with chandeliers and the soft hum of elite conversation. Isla felt out of place among the dazzling gowns and unfamiliar chatter, but she stood tall, doing her best not to show it. Damien introduced her to a few people, referring to her simply as my wife. Short, unembellished, but he never strayed far, always close enough for her to feel his presence. Things went smoothly until she appeared. A tall redhead in a curve-hugging dress, her smile radiant but her eyes razor-sharp when they landed on Isla. "Damien, it's been too long," she purred, voice sugary with venom. "And this is your new wife? What a surprise. I thought your type was a bit more dazzling." Heat rushed to Isla's face, but she didn't lower her head. She smiled, voice calm yet cutting. "I think his type is someone who doesn't need words to prove her worth, but thanks for your concern." The room fell silent for a beat, then a few quiet chuckles rippled through the crowd. The redhead stiffened, her smile faltering before she slipped away. Damien looked at Isla, a flicker of amusement in his eyes. "Well done," he murmured as they stepped onto the dance floor. He held out his hand, and she placed hers in his, her heart pounding as he pulled her into a slow waltz. The world seemed to shrink to just the two of them, his eyes, his hand warm against her waist. "You weren't afraid of her," he said, not as a question. "I'm not afraid of words," Isla replied, meeting his gaze. "I only fear things that truly matter." He didn't respond, but his expression softened, like he was seeing her for the first time. When the music ended, he didn't immediately let go, and a quiet current passed between them. On the drive home, rain began to fall. Drops drummed against the windshield, creating a chaotic rhythm. Damien drove in silence, the air between them heavy, as if both were holding back something neither dared to speak. Suddenly, he pulled the car over on a quiet street. Isla turned to him, confused. "What?" She didn't finish. Damien leaned over, his hand lifting her chin, and kissed her. Her first kiss, fierce, warm, filled with rain and the scent of his cologne. She froze for a second, then closed her eyes and let herself fall into it. The storm outside raged, but inside that moment, there was only him and her. When he pulled away, both of them were breathless. Damien stared at her, his eyes filled with conflict, like he'd just crossed a line he couldn't uncross. "I'm sorry," he murmured, voice rough. "I didn't mean to." Isla touched her lips, still feeling the warmth of his. "Don't apologize," she said, voice trembling but firm. "Just don't do it if it's not real." He didn't answer. He started the engine and drove on, but his hand gripped the steering wheel tightly, as if battling something inside himself. Isla turned to the window, her heart in chaos. That kiss had changed everything. She was no longer the girl just trying to survive a contract. She wanted him, not Damien Blackwell, the cold billionaire, but the man who trembled when he kissed her in the rain. The soft morning light spilled through the dining room windows, illuminating the dewdrops clinging to the lavender beds outside. Isla sat at the table, hands wrapped around a steaming cup of tea, but the warmth did nothing to ease the cold settling in her chest. The kiss in the rain the night before still haunted her. Fierce, unexpected, like a spark igniting in the middle of a storm. But now in the clarity of daylight, she couldn't stop wondering. Why had Damien kissed her? Was it a moment of impulse? A gesture of obligation as a husband in name only? Or was it something real? She heard his familiar footsteps approaching down the hall. Damien stepped in, sharp as ever in his black suit, but something was different, a subtle gentleness in his movements, like the ice around him was slowly melting. He paused when he saw her, his gaze brushing over her face before he gave a slight nod. "Good morning," he said, his voice deep, no longer cold. "Good morning," Isla replied, trying to keep her tone even despite the pounding in her chest. She slid the toast plate toward him, a habit she'd formed over the past few weeks. "I made extra. Want some?" Damien looked at the plate, and a faint smile tugged at the corner of his lips. Soft, but enough to warm her a little. He sat down, picked up a slice, and ate in silence. The space between them wasn't heavy like before, but it still brimmed with unspoken questions. Isla wanted to ask about the kiss, wanted to know what it meant, but she was afraid. Afraid he'd call it a mistake, afraid she was fooling herself. In the days that followed, Damien began to change. He stayed home more often, sometimes returning before sunset, and even sat with her in the reading room, quietly working on his laptop while she read. He started asking her questions about her favorite books, about the garden, about her childhood in Willow Creek. Small questions, but each one chipped away at the wall between them. He even brought home a pot of white roses from a business trip, setting it on the dining table with a simple, "Thought you might like this." Isla smiled, but her heart ached. He was acting like a husband, but was he truly one, or just playing the part to keep their contract comfortable for the next 4 months? One evening, as Isla watered the garden, Damien appeared with 2 glasses of red wine. "Take a break," he said, handing her a glass. They sat on the wooden bench beneath the oak tree, moonlight casting silver over his sharp features, which seemed softer now. "Did you ever think about leaving Willow Creek?" he asked, voice low, eyes on his wine. Isla took a sip, thoughtful. "I did. When I was little, I dreamed of seeing the world, reading every book in every library. But after my mother passed, all I wanted was to hold on to what remained of her." She looked at him, curious. "What about you? Did you ever want to walk away from all of this?" She motioned toward the estate. Damien gave a quiet chuckle, a rare, precious sound. "I have, but I wouldn't know where to go, or who I am without the business, without—" He trailed off, his gaze darkening. "Without everything I built to forget." Isla knew he was speaking of Elena, of the accident, even if he didn't say her name. She wanted to reach for his hand, to tell him she understood the kind of pain that never really leaves, but she didn't. Instead, she said softly, "Sometimes forgetting isn't the only way. Maybe starting over is another." He looked at her, eyes deep and searching, as if trying to find the truth in her words. "You make me want to believe that," he murmured, and in that moment, Isla felt her heart skip a beat. But then he stood, shattering the moment. "It's late. You should get some rest." She nodded, but sleep didn't come easily. Only 2 months remained on the contract. In 2 months, she would leave, and Damien would go back to his life, a life without her. The thought cut deeper than she expected. She realized she loved him, not for his wealth or power, but for the rare, quiet glimpses he allowed her to see. The worry in his eyes when she fainted, the kiss in the rain, the way his fingers brushed the rim of a wine glass when he was lost in thought. But what about him? Did he love her, or was he just playing the part of a good husband to keep things smooth? The next morning, Isla found a small box on the dining table. Inside was a silver necklace with a lavender-shaped pendant. No note, but she knew it was from Damien. She put it on, feeling the cool metal press against her skin, but her joy was mixed with pain. Was this a gift from the heart, or a prop in their charade? She looked at herself in the mirror, eyes glistening. "You can't keep doing this, Isla," she whispered. "You need the truth." That evening, she waited in the sitting room for Damien's return, her fingers clenched around the pendant. "Damien," she said when he entered, her voice trembling but steady, "I need to know. Everything you've been doing, the gifts, the moments, are they real? Or are they just part of the contract?" He looked at her, eyes conflicted. "Isla, He stopped, his fist clenching. "I'm not good at talking about feelings, but you make me feel things I thought were dead a long time ago." His words struck her like lightning, bright and painful. He hadn't said he loved her. He hadn't denied the contract. Isla gave a sad smile, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I understand," she said, turning away before he could see her break. Deep down, she knew she couldn't stay, not because she hated him, but because she loved him too much to stay in the shadows of almost. The dim afternoon light filtered through the reading room window, where Isla often sought comfort in the pages of a book. But today, Jane Eyre lay untouched on her lap, her gaze vacant, lost somewhere between heartbreak and resolve. The kiss in the rain still haunted her, a memory both sweet and cruel. It had stirred something deep inside her, But it also made her realize she was teetering on the edge of a love with no future. The marriage contract had only 2 months left, and she couldn't let herself fall any deeper. Not when Damien had never made his feelings clear. Isla had made her decision. She wouldn't leave, not yet. That would be irresponsible to her father, to the promise she made in the contract. She would stay and complete the 6 months as agreed, but she would close off her heart. No more moonlit conversations. No more smiling at Damien's quiet gestures. She would become the wife in name only, a silent presence, distant and guarded, no longer ruled by emotion. But Damien didn't make it easy. Since the night of the gala, he had changed, noticeably. He stayed home more, bringing her small gifts, a rare book she'd once mentioned, a new lavender plant for her garden. He joined her at the dining table, asking about her day with a gentleness she had never seen in him before. One day, when she accidentally dropped a spoon in the kitchen, he knelt to pick it up and gently took her hand. "Are you okay, Isla?" he asked, his voice low and sincere. She pulled her hand away, her heart aching. "I'm fine," she replied hoarsely, turning away before he could see the tears glistening in her eyes. Every kind gesture felt like a blade, something that made her ache for him and reminded her that it could all be temporary. He could treat her like a real wife, but he still hadn't said he loved her, and she was terrified that when the contract ended, she would be nothing more than a fading memory in his life. Isla began to withdraw. She avoided Damien's gaze, answered him briefly when he spoke, and spent most of her time in the garden or the reading room, anywhere she could escape his presence. But even there, she couldn't escape him completely. One evening, as she was watering the flowers, Damien appeared with a wool coat in hand. "It's cold," he said softly, draping it over her shoulders. "You should stay warm." She froze, tempted to shrug it off, but didn't. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice catching. He stood there watching her, his eyes full of questions. "Isla," he said, voice low but firm, "what's going on?" "You're not the same. If I did something wrong, just tell me." She turned her face away, taking a deep breath to hold back tears. "I'm just tired," she lied smoothly, but it hurt. "I need rest." She walked past him back into the house, leaving him alone in the garden, eyes full of helplessness. The final weeks of the contract passed in a haze of quiet tension. The more Damien tried to reach her, the more Isla pulled away. He left little notes for her at breakfast, made her meals when she slept late, even offered to take her to visit a historic library in the city. But each time she refused, with excuses of being busy or unwell. She saw the disappointment in his eyes, the hurt he didn't try to hide anymore. But she couldn't risk her heart again. She told herself this was the best way for both of them. The last day of the contract arrived and Isla was ready. She didn't have much to pack, just her old suitcase, a few clothes, some books, and a photo of her mother. She stood in the bedroom, looking at the space that had once held her hopes, her dreams, and now only sorrow. On the nightstand, she placed the silver necklace with the lavender pendant, along with a short note. "Thank you for everything. I wish you happiness. Isla." When Damien came home that night, he found the room empty. The letter and necklace sat quietly on the table, a silent farewell. He read the note, his hand tightening around the paper. For the first time in years, he felt a hollow space inside him, one he couldn't fill. He had let her go, not because he didn't love her, but because he hadn't had the courage to say he did. He gripped the necklace tightly, his chest heavy. Isla was gone from his life, and this time, he knew he couldn't let her stay gone forever. Are you still following the story? Please leave your thoughts on the story in the comments below. All your comments are the motivation for us to create better stories. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Thank you very much. Heavy snow blanketed the small town of Willow Creek, coating narrow streets and modest rooftops in white. Isla had returned to her childhood home, where the scent of aged wood and the crackle of the fireplace still held memories of simpler times. But she was no longer the naive girl she once was. She carried a broken heart, and though she tried to hide it, the pain bled through her empty gaze. She had quit her job at the library, unable to bear the curious looks and whispered questions. Now she worked part-time at a small bookstore, hiding among shelves of fiction, trying to forget Damien. But every night, when the moonlight streamed through her window, his image returned. His rare smile, the worry in his eyes when she fainted, the kiss they shared in the rain. She told herself leaving was the right choice, that she'd protected her heart. But if that was true, why did it feel like she'd lost a part of herself? At the Blackwell estate, Damien lived like a ghost. The bedroom they once shared was now cold and hollow. The silver necklace with the lavender pendant lay beside her short note. "Thank you for everything. I wish you happiness." He had read that note 100 times, every word a dagger to the chest. He remembered Isla's eyes that night she asked about their relationship. Those brown eyes filled with hope and pain, waiting for a truth he was too afraid to speak. His cowardice had driven her away. Now all he had left was regret. In the early days after Isla left, Damien tried to return to his old routine. He buried himself in work, attending meetings from dawn to dusk, signing contracts, issuing orders, as if being busy could fill the void. For brief moments, he managed to convince himself life would go back to normal, that he could exist as he had before Isla walked into his world, emotionless, unshaken. But every night, when he returned to the empty mansion, reality hit harder. No scent of cookies drifting from the kitchen, no soft footsteps in the garden, no gentle voice echoing from the reading room. He had fallen back into grief. Only this time, it was worse than losing Elena. Because now it wasn't fate that took someone from him, it was him. He often sat in his study, gripping the necklace in his palm, eyes closed, trying to relive every second with Isla. He remembered her smile while tending the garden, the fierceness in her voice when she stood up to the redhead at the gala, the warmth in her kiss beneath the rain. Those memories both nourished and destroyed him, fueling hope, then tearing him apart again. The thought of her moving on, living without him, crushed him. One night when snow fell thick and fast, Damien could take no more. He opened the safe, pulled out the marriage contract, the cold, binding document that once tied her to him, and stared at the ink that had once mattered. Then, without hesitation, he tore it to shreds. Piece by piece, it fell to the floor like fragments of the fear that had caged him for too long. The contract no longer mattered. Only Isla did. He drove through snow-covered roads, heart pounding like it had the first time he saw her. By the time he reached Willow Creek, it was late, the snowfall relentless, but he didn't care. He parked in front of her small house, the golden light from a window flickering like a fragile thread of hope. He stepped out, snow clinging to his coat, and stood at the door, taking a deep breath. This time he wouldn't let fear or the past stand in his way. He knocked. The sound echoed in the quiet night. No answer. He knocked again, louder, voice hoarse. "Isla, it's me. Please, open the door." Inside, Isla sat by the fireplace. Her book slipped from her lap when she heard him. Her heart raced, fear and hope colliding inside her. She wanted to run to him. She wanted to see him, but the pain of the past weeks kept her frozen. Why was he here? To hurt her again? She stood slowly, walked to the door, her hand trembling on the knob. She opened it, and their eyes met. Damien stood in the snow, hair and shoulders dusted in white, his breath visible in the frigid air. He looked at her as if she was the only thing left in the world. Without a word, he stepped forward and pulled something from his coat pocket. Torn pieces of paper, the shredded remains of their contract. "I don't need this," he whispered, voice breaking. "I just need you." Isla blinked, tears welling, but before she could say a word, Damien cupped her chin and kissed her. The kiss was fierce, desperate, full of snow's chill and his warmth. She froze for a second, then closed her eyes, melted into him, gripping his coat as if afraid he'd disappear. The kiss said everything he couldn't: the pain, the love, the regret. They stepped inside, the door closing behind them. In the soft glow of the fire, their bodies found each other. Damien gently slipped off her coat, his hands trembling but certain, as if memorizing every second. Isla responded in kind, finally letting go of every barrier. They belonged to each other, not because of a contract, not out of duty, but because their hearts had chosen it. That night they became one. not bound by paper but by truth. When morning light spilled through the windows, Isla lay in Damien's arms, her head on his chest, listening to his steady heartbeat. A question she had buried for so long rose to the surface. She looked up at him, her gaze soft but steady. "Damien," she whispered, "why did you choose me? Out of all the women out there, why someone like me? I'm not anyone special." He was quiet for a moment, his hand stilling in her hair. He stared at the ceiling, searching for the right words. Words he had held in far too long. Then he exhaled, voice low and raw. "When I first heard about you from your father's lawyer, I only intended to help someone in debt. But then, I saw you, a photo in the file, standing outside the library, smiling at a child. You didn't know I was watching, but that smile, it reminded me of the days I still believed in something good." He turned to her, eyes dark and earnest. "I've lived in darkness since Elena, Isla. I didn't think I could feel again. But you were light. And I was too afraid to touch it, afraid I'd snuff it out. I married you not because of the contract, but because I wanted you close, even if I couldn't admit it. I was a coward, and I hurt you because of it." Isla blinked, tears shining, but she smiled through them. "You're not hurting me anymore," she said, placing her hand on his cheek. "Not if you're really here, with me." Damien kissed her forehead, holding her tighter. "I'm here, Isla, for good." He brushed her hair gently, voice gravelly with emotion. "I love you, Isla. I was a fool not to say it sooner, but I'll spend the rest of my life proving it." Isla smiled, tears rolling down her cheeks. But this time, they were tears of joy. "I love you too," she whispered, placing her hand over his heart, feeling it beat steady beneath her palm. Outside, snow still fell, but inside that little house, winter had given way to something new. Spring. 1 year later, spring sunlight bathed the town of Willow Creek, casting a gentle lavender hue over the freshly blooming flower beds. Isla stood in front of the mirror in her father's small house, wearing a simple white floral dress with delicate lace at the collar. There were no chandeliers, no archways of white roses like the first wedding. Just her, in a dress she chose for herself, holding a bouquet of wildflowers she had picked that morning from the garden. She smiled at her reflection, not the frightened girl from a year ago, but a woman who knew what she wanted and who she wanted to stand beside. Today, she and Damien would marry again, but this time, for real, no contract, no transaction, only love. A love built from healed wounds, shared silences, and the thousands of small moments that had knit their lives together. Her fingers touched the silver necklace with the lavender pendant. Damien's gift, returned and given back again the night he stood in the snow. It had become a symbol of their journey, from distance to closeness, from hurt to happiness. The small chapel at the end of town had been simply decorated with white ribbons and wildflowers on each pew. The townspeople of Willow Creek, once curious about Isla's mysterious marriage, now sat with warm smiles as if welcoming her home. Her father was there, eyes filled with guilt, but also joy. He held her hand before walking her down the aisle, whispering, "You deserve this happiness, Isla. I'm sorry for pushing you to the edge of it." She squeezed his hand gently, smiling. "I forgive you, and I thank you, because if not for that contract, I wouldn't have met him." When the chapel doors opened, Isla stepped inside, and her eyes found Damien immediately. He stood at the end of the aisle, dressed not in the severe black tuxedo of the past, but in a light gray suit. His hair was slightly tousled, like he had run his fingers through it too many times out of nervousness. But when he saw her, his gray eyes lit up, as if she was the only light in his world. He smiled, a real smile, unguarded, unhidden, and Isla felt her heart overflow. The ceremony was simple, yet full of warmth. They exchanged vows, not scripted, not rehearsed, but spoken straight from the heart. "Isla," Damien said, his deep voice trembling with emotion, "you gave me a reason to live again, to love again. I promise to spend my life loving and protecting you, not out of duty, but because you are everything to me." Tears shimmered in Isla's eyes as she replied, Damien, you showed me that love can heal even the deepest wounds. I promise to stand by you, no matter what life brings, because you are my home. When they exchanged rings, simple silver bands engraved with tiny lavender blooms, applause rose from the crowd. Damien leaned down and kissed her, a soft but profound kiss, a quiet declaration that this time they were truly, eternally each other's. Isla wrapped her arms around his neck, feeling his warmth, knowing she was exactly where she belonged. After the ceremony, a small outdoor reception was held in the garden behind the chapel. Wooden tables with white linens, lanterns strung through the trees, and the gentle hum of violins created an atmosphere of rustic magic. Damien never strayed far from Isla, always holding her hand or resting his palm on her back, as if afraid she might disappear again. He laughed more, talked to the people of Willow Creek, even played with the children darting through the garden. Isla watched him, heart full. The cold, closed-off man who once terrified her was now the man she loved, the one who had opened his heart for her. Then came the surprise. Damien stood with a microphone and announced he had invested in Willow Creek, a new library, an upgraded school, and a community center. "This is my gift to the place that raised the woman I love," he said, turning to Isla with warm eyes. The crowd erupted in applause. Isla threw her arms around him, tears of joy streaming down her face. "You didn't have to do that," she whispered. "I wanted to," he replied, kissing her forehead, "because you deserve it, and because I want to build a future with you, here or wherever your heart leads." As night fell, they stood beneath the moonlight, hand in hand, watching friends and family dance around the bonfire. Isla rested her head on Damien's shoulder, listening to his steady heartbeat. "I once thought I'd never find love," she whispered, "but you changed that." Damien tightened his grip on her fingers, voice low but full of emotion. "And you saved me, Isla. You're the first woman I've truly loved, and the only one I want beside me for the rest of my life." They stood there under the moon in laughter, knowing their journey, from a cold contract to a healing love, had brought them exactly where they were meant to be. The snow from last winter had long melted, and for Isla and Damien, spring had finally come. Forever. The clinking of crystal glasses blended with low murmurs in the elegant dining room of Le Ciel, the most expensive restaurant in Manhattan. Evelyn Carter moved through the dining area with habitual grace, balancing a tray of champagne flutes while her eyes scanned the room, seeking empty plates or a raised hand. Her black uniform was fitted and neat, but her sharp hazel eyes, always watchful, hinted at a mind that didn't quite belong in this role. At 29, Evelyn was older than most of her fellow waitstaff, and though they often teased her for her uncanny calm, they respected her too. Evelyn didn't just wait tables. She anticipated needs, remembered guests' preferences, and handled every situation with near supernatural composure. Tonight, the restaurant buzzed more than usual. A group of VIPs, tech moguls, had booked the private dining section, their laughter and business chatter spilling past the velvet ropes. Evelyn heard enough to gather that the guest of honor was Julian West, the elusive CEO of WestTech, a company synonymous with cutting-edge AI and ruthless ambition. She didn't care for the details. Her focus was making sure the evening ran flawlessly. A spilled drink or forgotten dish could cost her the tips she desperately needed. Her mother's hospital bill was due again, and the thought tightened her chest. Evelyn had once been a rising star in linguistics, a graduate student at Columbia with a gift for Mandarin and French. But when her mother's cancer returned, she gave it all up, her studies, her dreams, her savings, to care for her. Now, 3 years later, she was here, serving overpriced wine to men who spent more on dinner than she made in a month. "Table 12 needs another bottle of Chateau Lafite 98, whispered Claire, the floor manager, as she passed by. Evelyn nodded, adjusted her tray, and headed to the wine cellar. Her phone buzzed in the apron pocket, but she ignored it. Personal calls were strictly forbidden during shifts. That was the restaurant's rule. She retrieved the bottle, uncorked it with practiced precision, and returned to the VIP area, now thick with the tension of wealth and influence. Julian West sat at the head of the table, his presence commanding even in silence. He was younger than she'd imagined, perhaps mid-30s, with slicked-back black hair and eyes that seemed to analyze everything they landed on. His tailored suit clung perfectly to his frame, and though he offered polite smiles to his companions, there was an iciness to him, a wall that kept people at a distance. Evelyn poured the wine carefully, avoiding his gaze. She'd learned long ago that men like him never noticed women like her. As she stepped back, her phone buzzed again, this time more insistently. She glanced at Claire, who was busy charming a guest, then slipped behind a column to check the screen. The name May blinked with a string of frantic messages. Evelyn, I'm stuck at JFK. Customs is holding me. They don't speak Chinese, and I don't understand what's happening. Please help me. Evelyn's stomach sank. May, her friend from graduate school, was always a bit reckless, jetting around the world chasing art deals. But this sounded serious. Evelyn hesitated, finger hovering over the call button. The restaurant was in full swing. She couldn't just walk away. But then May sent a voice message, her voice trembling. Evie, they're saying something about my visa. I'm scared. Evelyn looked around. The VIP table was engrossed in a heated debate about stock valuations. Claire was still occupied. Evelyn ducked into the narrow hallway by the kitchen, pressed her phone to her ear, and answered in a hushed tone. May, it's me. Stay calm. I'll help. May's words came in rapid-fire Mandarin, panicked and breathless. Evelyn responded in the same language, her tone steady as she asked for details. Soon May handed the phone to a customs officer who spoke only English and sounded annoyed. Evelyn became the bridge, translating May's explanation about an art shipment and her visa status. She kept her voice low, aware of the clattering staff nearby. But her focus was razor-sharp. She clarified dates, referenced vague regulations she remembered from a past translation job, and even threw in a polite request for leniency. After 10 tense minutes, the customs officer relented, agreeing to release May with a warning. Evelyn exhaled, her shoulders dropping. You're okay now, she told May in Mandarin. Get some rest. Call me later. She hung up, slipped her phone back into her pocket, and smoothed her apron. The entire exchange had taken less than 15 minutes, but it felt like a lifetime. She stepped back into the dining room, heart still pounding, and resumed her duties. No one seemed to notice her brief disappearance, except perhaps the man at the head of the VIP table. Julian West's gaze flicked over her as she passed by, his expression unreadable. Evelyn didn't linger. She refilled glasses, cleared plates, and smiled through the rest of her shift, though exhaustion gnawed at her bones. When the restaurant finally emptied and the last guest departed, it was well past midnight. She counted her tips, decent but not enough to cover the latest hospital invoice, and headed home to her small Brooklyn apartment, unaware that a storm had just begun to brew. Julian West leaned back in his chair, the chatter around him fading into meaningless noise. He wasn't here to socialize. He was here to observe, to identify weaknesses in those who claimed to be allies. 3 years ago, a deal with a Chinese tech firm had cost him $200 million and a friendship he'd thought unbreakable. That betrayal had hardened him. Trust had become ash in his mouth. Now every word, every glance was a potential threat. He'd noticed the waitress from the start, not because she stood out, but because she didn't. She moved with silent efficiency, her expression calm even when berated by a guest. Her name tag read Evelyn, and though he hadn't meant to eavesdrop, he'd caught snippets of her conversation when she slipped away. Fluent Mandarin, so fluent it startled him. His jaw clenched when he heard phrases like shipment and customs. To others, it might seem harmless. To Julian, it was a red flag. He knew this game. Corporate spies often wore innocent masks, servers, drivers, janitors. He'd seen it before. Her composure only made him more suspicious. Why would a waitress at Le Ciel speak Mandarin like a native? And why would she take a call mid-shift, whispering about customs and shipments? By the time dessert was served, Julian had made up his mind. He signaled the restaurant owner, a business contact, and spoke quietly. The waitress, Evelyn. She's a risk. Fire her. The owner nodded, accustomed to Julian's influence. Julian didn't offer explanations. He never did. He finished his wine, left a generous tip, and stepped into the Manhattan night, his thoughts already on the next issue. He didn't give Evelyn another thought. Not then. but his decision would soon draw them both into a collision neither could have foreseen. Evelyn arrived home at 2 a.m., her feet aching and her head heavy. She checked her phone one last time, hoping for a thank you from May. Instead, there was only a message from Claire. Be at the restaurant by 9 a.m. We need to talk. Her heart sank. She knew that tone. Something was wrong. Very wrong. She crawled into bed, stared at the ceiling, and whispered a quiet prayer that whatever was coming, she'd find a way through. For her mother, she had to. The morning sunlight filtered through the thin curtains of Evelyn Carter's small Brooklyn apartment, but it brought no warmth. She woke with a heavy feeling in her chest, her mind still spinning from Claire's message the night before. Be at the restaurant at 9 a.m. We need to talk. That tone, brief and cold, promised nothing good. Evelyn lay in bed for a few more minutes, staring at the stained ceiling, trying to shake off the ominous feeling, but the worry clung to her like a shadow that wouldn't lift. She forced herself to sit up, brewed a cup of cheap coffee, and checked her phone. No new messages from May, only an email from the hospital reminding her about an unpaid bill, the number making her heart sink. Her mother, Margaret, had been readmitted just last week due to complications from chemotherapy. The doctors said her condition was stable, but in the world of cancer, stable never meant safe. Evelyn needed her job at Le Ciel now more than ever, not just for the salary, but for the generous tips from wealthy clients. She put on a gray sweater and jeans, trying to look presentable despite the turmoil inside. When she stepped outside, the October air in Manhattan was freezing, as if it cut right through her thin layers. She caught the subway to Midtown, silently observing the blank faces of fellow passengers. In her mind, she replayed last night's shift, trying to pinpoint what could have triggered Claire's summons. Did she spill a drink? Forget an order? Did a guest complain? No, she was sure she'd done everything right. Except the call from May. Her brow furrowed as she remembered those 10 stolen minutes in the kitchen hallway, speaking Mandarin to help May through customs. Had someone overheard? But even if they had, so what? Le Ciel didn't ban personal calls during breaks, as long as they didn't disrupt service. And she'd been careful, kept her voice low, and returned to work immediately. So why had Claire's message sounded like a sentence being handed down? When Evelyn arrived at Le Ciel at 8:55 a.m., the restaurant looked nothing like the glamorous scene from the night before. No golden lights, no clinking glasses, just cold white lighting and the sharp scent of floor cleaner. Her heart pounded as she pushed open the door. Claire was already waiting in the small office behind the bar, sitting behind a desk with a file folder in front of her. The usually warm manager now wore a stern expression, lips pressed tightly together. "Have a seat, Evelyn," Claire said, motioning to the chair across from her. Her voice was devoid of emotion. Evelyn sat down, hands clenched in her lap. "What's going on, Claire? Did I do something wrong?" Claire sighed and slid a piece of paper toward her. "This is your termination notice. Today is your last day at Le Ciel." The words hit Evelyn like a punch to the chest. She blinked, trying to process. "Termination? Why? What did I do?" Claire looked away as if she couldn't bear to meet Evelyn's eyes. "This decision came from upper management. I'm not authorized to give details. You know, Le Ciel has very high standards, and sometimes some employees just aren't the right fit." "Not the right fit," Evelyn repeated, her voice rising more than she intended. "Claire, I've worked here for 3 years. I've never had a complaint, never broken protocol. If there's a problem, you need to tell me what it is." Claire shook her head, still avoiding eye contact. "I'm sorry, Evelyn. This wasn't my decision. You'll receive your paycheck for the month and a small severance package. Please sign here, and good luck." Evelyn stared at the paper, the words blurring before her eyes. She wanted to scream, to demand an explanation, but the wave of despair rising inside left her frozen. She signed her name with a trembling hand, then stood feeling as if the ground beneath her had collapsed. Claire said something about returning her uniform, but Evelyn barely heard it. She walked out of the office, her mind blank. In the dining room, a few co-workers cleaning tables glanced at her with a mix of curiosity and pity. They had obviously heard. Evelyn lowered her head, grabbed her bag, and rushed out of Le Ciel, not wanting anyone to see the tears threatening to spill. Outside, a light rain had begun to fall, the cold drops landing on her hair and shoulders. She stood beneath an awning, breathing deeply, trying to keep from breaking apart. She thought of her mother, those long nights in the hospital, the weak smile she gave when Evelyn shared stories about quirky guests at the restaurant. How could she tell her mother she'd just lost her job? How would she pay for medicine, rent, food? She pulled out her phone, tempted to call May and vent, but remembered May was likely still dealing with the aftermath at the airport. In the end, Evelyn just stood there, rain soaking through her sweater, as helplessness gripped her chest like a vice. She started walking, with no destination in mind, just the need to get away from LaCiel. When she stopped at a newsstand to escape the rain, her eyes landed on a magazine cover. A sharp-featured man stared back at her under the headline, Julian West, the man reshaping the future of tech. Her brow furrowed. She recognized that face. It was the man from the VIP table last night, the CEO of West Tech. The short article below mentioned his appearance at LaCiel, where he had hosted a private dinner for major partners. Evelyn skimmed the text, her heartbeat picking up. One line caught her eye, something about Julian West's sharp instincts for identifying risk. She remembered his gaze last night, the way he looked at her after she returned from the call. Could it be number? No way. A man like Julian West had no reason to notice a server like her, but the bad feeling refused to go away. She recalled her Mandarin conversation, the words shipment, customs clearance. If he overheard and misunderstood? She shook her head, telling herself she was overthinking, but the thought clung to her like a puzzle piece that wouldn't fit. She bought the magazine, stuffed it into her bag, and kept walking in the rain. When she got home, she collapsed onto the couch, utterly drained. Her phone buzzed, a message from the hospital informing her that her mother needed additional tests. Evelyn buried her face in her hands. At last, the tears came. She had no idea what to do next, but she knew one thing. That call last night, no matter how innocent, had changed everything. Meanwhile, across Manhattan, Julian West sat in his office on the top floor of West Tech, looking out over the city through floor-to-ceiling windows. He wasn't thinking much about the waitress from last night. The decision to fire her had been instinctual, a way to eliminate a potential risk. But when his assistant handed him the event summary, the name Evelyn Carter stood out among the listed staff. Julian frowned, an odd unease flickering in his chest. He pushed the report aside, telling himself it was nothing, just a small detail. But deep down, he knew he'd just set something in motion, something far bigger than he could have imagined. 3 days after being fired, Evelyn Carter stood in front of the mirror in her cramped Brooklyn apartment, squeezing herself into an old navy blue suit. It was slightly too tight, but it was the most professional thing she still owned from her grad school days. She tied her hair into a low bun, checked the documents in her hands, and took a deep breath. Today was a chance to start over. A job interview for a temporary interpreter, assistant at West Tech, a tech company she only knew from headlines. She wasn't sure she could compete, but after sending out dozens of resumes and receiving nothing but silence, she couldn't afford to let this opportunity slip. Her mother was still in the hospital, and with each passing day, the medical bills grew heavier on Evelyn's shoulders. She had spent the entire night reviewing her Mandarin and French, practicing interview answers to hide the desperation gnawing at her. I can do this, she told herself, though the voice in her head trembled with doubt. She slipped the documents into her bag, checked her phone, no messages from May, just another reminder email from the hospital, and walked out the door. The West Tech Tower in Midtown Manhattan rose high into the sky, its glass facade glittering in the sun. Evelyn felt small as she entered the marble-floored lobby, its cold elegance a symbol of wealth and power. She presented her ID at the reception desk, received a visitor badge, and was directed to the 32nd floor where the HR department was conducting interviews. In the elevator, she silently recited her answers. I have experience in freelance translation. I'm fluent in Mandarin and French, and I always ensure accuracy and confidentiality in my work. The waiting area outside the HR office was more crowded than she expected. Over a dozen applicants, most younger than her, sat in leather chairs, scrolling through phones or reviewing notes. Evelyn found a seat in the corner, opened her folder, and pretended to read. But her mind wandered back to LaCiel. She still didn't understand why she'd been fired, And the thought that the Mandarin phone call might have had something to do with it still unsettled her. She shook her head and forced herself to focus. Today wasn't the time for the past. Evelyn Carter, a middle-aged woman with her hair in a tight bun and a gray blazer, appeared at the door. "Come with me." Evelyn stood, offered a small smile, and followed. The woman introduced herself as Sarah Nguyen, Westtech's head of human resources. The interview room was spacious, with windows overlooking the Manhattan skyline. Besides Sarah, two others sat behind the table, an older man with a friendly face and Julian West. Evelyn froze for a second as she recognized him. The sharp features, the analytical eyes, the commanding presence. He was the man from the VIP table that night. She hadn't expected him to be here. Sure, Westtech was his company, but a CEO like him couldn't possibly have time to vet candidates for a temporary assistant position. Or did he? She quickly composed herself, maintained a professional smile, and took a seat. Julian didn't look at her at first, his eyes fixed on the folder in front of him, but she could feel the tension in the room. Sarah began the interview, asking about Evelyn's experience and skill set. She answered smoothly, describing her time as a graduate student at Columbia, her freelance translation projects, and her ability to navigate multilingual communication. The older man, who introduced himself as Tom, a project director, nodded, clearly impressed. But Julian remained silent, his fingers tapping lightly on the table, as if waiting for something. "Ms. Carter," Sarah said, glancing at her resume, "you've worked in high-pressure environments. This role requires extreme discretion, especially when handling sensitive information. Can you share how you maintain confidentiality?" Evelyn nodded, choosing her words carefully. "I always follow confidentiality protocols in every translation project. I understand that in tech, even a small mistake can have serious consequences. I double-check everything and never share information beyond the scope of the assignment." Sarah smiled, but Julian finally looked up, his gaze as sharp as a blade. "You speak of confidentiality," he said in a low, cool tone. "But how do we know you won't misuse your skills? For instance, using a language no one else in the room understands to exchange private information?" The question struck like an arrow, and Evelyn's heart pounded. She didn't know exactly what Julian had overheard that night, but she was certain he was referring to the Mandarin phone call. She kept her voice even, though her nerves were frayed inside. "Mr. West, I use language to assist, not to conceal. If I ever speak a language others don't understand, it's to serve the task. For example, helping a foreign partner understand the details. I have no reason to do otherwise." Julian gave a quiet, unreadable grunt. Sarah quickly shifted topics, asking about teamwork and flexibility, but Evelyn could still feel Julian's eyes on her, as if probing for a crack in her composure. When the interview ended, she shook hands with all three, thanked them, and left the room feeling both relieved and uneasy. In the executive meeting room on the top floor of Westtech, Julian sat across from Sarah, a list of candidates in his hand. The name Evelyn Carter was circled in red, with Sarah's note, "Outstanding candidate, ideal fit." Julian frowned and pushed the page away. "We don't need her," he said curtly. "There are dozens of qualified applicants." Sarah raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. "Julian, she was the best we saw today. Fluent in 2 languages, real-world experience, and her response to your question, very composed. We need a translator immediately for next week's French partnership project. She's a perfect match." Julian crossed his arms, his eyes darkening. "She used to work at Le Ciel. I don't trust people who are careless." Sarah tilted her head, clearly confused. "Careless? There's nothing unusual in her record. She left her graduate program for family reasons, not disciplinary. And what does Le Ciel have to do with anything?" Julian didn't answer right away. He remembered Evelyn's voice echoing in that dark hallway, words like shipment and customs clearance ringing in his mind like a warning bell. He had ordered her termination, and now here she was, like a ghost from the past. But he couldn't tell Sarah that his judgment was based on a hunch, or worse, a lingering scar from the betrayal he'd suffered 3 years ago. "1-week trial," Tom, the project director, broke the silence. "If she doesn't deliver, we replace her. But Sarah's right. We don't have many better options." Julian clenched his jaw but finally nodded. 1 week, no more. Evelyn stepped out of the West Tech Tower, unaware she had just crossed into dangerous territory. She had no idea Julian was behind her firing, and even less that he was now watching her from the 32nd floor window, suspicion written all over his face. But as she walked into the street, a sliver of hope stirred inside her. She had done well in the interview, and if hired, she might finally be able to care for her mother. With quiet determination, she vowed to prove her worth, no matter how coldly that man might look at her. Evelyn Carter approached her first day at West Tech with the cautious focus of someone walking a tightrope. She had received a confirmation email from Sarah Nguyen the night before. 1 week probation, starting Monday, as a temporary interpreter assistant. The pay wasn't much, but it was enough to give her a sliver of hope, at least enough to keep her mother's hospital bills under control for now. She wore the same navy blue suit, carried a small notebook and pen, and walked in determined to prove she wasn't just a good fit. She was irreplaceable. The 32nd floor of West Tech was far busier than it had been on interview day, with employees bustling through glass hallways, laptops and coffee cups in hand. Sarah greeted her in HR, handed her a temporary employee badge, and gave her a stack of documents to translate into French for an upcoming meeting with European partners. "You'll be working directly with Tom's project team," Sarah said with a smile. "But Julian may request your assistance as well. He's a little demanding, but don't take it personally." Evelyn nodded, but the mention of Julian West tightened her chest. She still remembered his piercing stare during the interview, his loaded question about confidentiality. She didn't know why he'd singled her out, but she told herself to keep everything professional and avoid any trouble. She was led to a small meeting room where Tom and a few engineers were discussing a new AI system. The work started smoothly. She translated technical documents, jotted down industry-specific terminology, and even suggested a more precise phrasing in French. Tom was clearly pleased, and the engineers started calling her a lifesaver after she corrected a mistranslated section of the draft. And then Julian walked in. He entered mid-morning, unannounced, radiating a presence that brought the entire room to silence. He wore a charcoal gray suit, no tie, but exuded effortless authority. "Tom, how's the progress?" he asked, his voice deep and sharp. Tom quickly launched into an update, while Evelyn sat at the corner of the table, quietly working on a paragraph. She felt Julian's eyes sweep over her, but didn't look up, staying focused as if he weren't even there. After hearing the report, Julian suddenly turned to her. "Ms. Carter, this translation," he tapped the document she just completed. "Are you sure scalability is the correct term in this context?" Evelyn blinked, surprised but unfazed. "Yes, Mr. West. In the context of AI systems, scalability is the standard term in French for scalability. Using extensibility could confuse our technical partners." Julian studied her for a moment, as if gauging whether she was bluffing or genuinely competent. Finally, he gave a slight nod. "Good, carry on." He left the room as abruptly as he'd entered, leaving behind a tense silence. Tom leaned toward her and whispered, "Don't worry, that's just how he is. If he doesn't object, it means you passed." But Evelyn didn't feel relieved. There was something in the way Julian looked at her, not just suspicion, but a deeper wariness, like she was a riddle he hadn't solved yet. She began to notice him more throughout the day, not because she wanted to, but because he always seemed to be where she was working. In meetings, he scrutinized every detail, firing sharp questions that left engineers scrambling. In the hallways, he walked alone, never chatting, his gaze always fixed ahead. He was undeniably brilliant. His insights into the project revealed a mind that anticipated problems before they even emerged. But he was also solitary, like an island in a sea of people. At lunch, Evelyn sat alone in the break room, scrolling through her phone for hospital updates. A friendly young software engineer, Mason, sat beside her and handed her a can of soda. "You okay?" he asked. "Getting grilled by Julian on day one? That's rough." She offered a faint smile. "It's fine. He just seems intense." Mason chuckled. "That's putting it lightly. Julian used to be different, you know. More open, even kind of funny. But after the thing with the Chinese company, he changed. Evelyn looked up, curious. What thing? Mason lowered his voice as if wary of being overheard. 3 years ago, Westech partnered with a tech firm in Beijing. Julian trusted them. He even considered the CEO a close friend. But they stole Westech's AI data and sold it to a competitor. The company lost $200 million. Julian lost his trust in everyone. Ever since then, he's been hypersensitive about anything related to China. Language, people, all of it. Evelyn's heart sank. She immediately recalled her Mandarin phone call at Le Ciel and Julian's expression when she returned to the table. So you mean he's suspicious of anyone who speaks Mandarin? Mason shrugged. Sort of. I don't think it's personal. It's just, he's haunted by betrayal. If he knows you speak Mandarin, be careful. Evelyn nodded, but deep down, a puzzle piece clicked into place. Her firing didn't feel like a coincidence anymore. If Julian had been at Le Ciel, if he overheard her call and misunderstood, everything suddenly made sense. She had no proof, but the thought that she was punished because of his past pain left her both angry and sad. That afternoon, Evelyn was called to Julian's office to help translate a short email from a French partner. His office was spacious and minimalist, with a floor-to-ceiling window wall. Julian sat behind his desk, eyes glued to his laptop. Ms. Carter, he said without looking up, this email needs to be translated precisely. No mistakes. Can you handle that? Yes, Mr. West, she replied calmly. She took the document, sat down across from him, and began translating, ignoring the feeling of being watched. When she handed him the finished draft, Julian skimmed it, then suddenly asked, "Where did you learn Mandarin?" The question caught her off guard, but she kept her composure. "I studied it in university and continued on my own. I also lived in Beijing for a year as part of an exchange program." He looked at her, his gaze intense, as if searching for a lie. "Beijing," he repeated softly. "Interesting." Evelyn didn't respond, but she could feel the suspicion in his voice. She stood, asked to be excused, and as she shut the office door behind her, she heard him murmur, more to himself than to her, "Better safe than sorry." Back at her desk, Evelyn couldn't shake the realization that Julian West wasn't just a cold CEO. He was a man wounded, and his pain had turned her into collateral damage. She gripped her pen tightly, a fire rising in her chest. She wouldn't let him push her out of Westech the way he had at Le Ciel. If he doubted her, she would prove him wrong, by being better than anyone else. In his office, Julian closed his laptop and stared out the window. The name Evelyn Carter echoed in his mind like a question without an answer. He didn't want to admit it, but she was good. Too good. And that made him wary. He had trusted the wrong person once before, and the cost had been too high. He would watch her, just for this week, and if she gave even the slightest reason to doubt, he would make sure she was gone from Westech. For good. Evelyn Carter sat at her small desk, tucked into the corner of Westech's office, the glow from her laptop screen lighting her face. It was the third day of her probation week, and she felt as if she were walking across a minefield. The translation work had gone smoothly. She'd completed French documents and supported the engineering team with technical terminology. But Julian West's watchful eyes still left her unsettled. After their brief conversation in his office the day before, she was more certain than ever that he suspected her because of the Mandarin phone call back at Le Ciel. And if Mason was right about Julian's past, that suspicion wasn't personal. It had already cost her one job. She couldn't let it happen again. If Julian continued to view her as a threat, her trial period might end without any explanation, just like it did at Le Ciel. She needed proof to clear her name, and that thought led her to one person, Lucas, a tech staffer at Le Ciel, who had helped her several times when the POS system glitched. Lucas was a quiet guy, about 25, always wearing headphones and preferring to work alone in the back tech room. He and Evelyn had built a friendly rapport through brief chats during breaks. She'd often bring him coffee when shifts ran long. If anyone could access Le Ciel's security cameras, it was him. During lunch, when the office was quieter, Evelyn pulled out her phone and texted him, "Lucas, it's Evie. Can you help me with something? I need to see the security footage from last Friday night, around the hallway near the kitchen. It's important." She bit her lip, waiting. A few minutes later, the message showed "seen," and Lucas replied, "What's going on? I can try, but management doesn't like staff pulling footage. It's risky. Evelyn hesitated, but she had no other option. I know it's a big ask, but I think I was fired over a misunderstanding from that shift. Please, Lucas, I only need a short clip. After a pause, he responded, Okay, I'll try after my shift tonight. Send me the exact time, and I'll look for the footage. Evelyn exhaled with relief and quickly sent him the time frame, around 9:30 p.m., near the kitchen hallway. A sliver of hope crept in, though anxiety still lingered. If the footage didn't show what she needed, or if Lucas got caught, it could all backfire. She slid her phone back into her pocket and returned to her translation, forcing herself to concentrate. That night near midnight, Evelyn received an email from Lucas. He'd attached a video file and a brief note. This is what you asked for. Kitchen hallway, 9:28 to 9:40 p.m., last Friday. I erased the access logs, but don't tell anyone. Good luck. She opened her laptop, heart pounding, and downloaded the clip. The footage was a little grainy, but clear enough to show the narrow hallway leading to Lucielle's kitchen. She watched herself in her black uniform leaning against the wall, phone to her ear. The audio wasn't crisp, but her voice came through, speaking Mandarin, calmly translating May's words to the customs officer. She replayed it, hearing her explain the art shipment, mention the visa, and politely ask for leniency. There was nothing shady, nothing secretive, just someone helping a friend in trouble. Evelyn watched the clip twice more, ensuring she hadn't missed anything. Relief washed over her, but it was accompanied by a slow-burning anger. If Julian had overheard that call and misunderstood, then he wasn't just wrong. He had upended her life based on a snap judgment. She copied the video onto a USB drive and made a decision. She would give it to Julian, not to apologize, not to beg, but to show him the truth. The next morning, Evelyn arrived at West Tech earlier than usual. She wore a crisp white blouse and black slacks, trying to project calm even as nerves twisted inside her. Giving Julian the video was a gamble. He might take it as a challenge or worse, dismiss it, but she couldn't keep letting him see her as a threat and do nothing. At 8:30 a.m., after confirming with Sarah that Julian was in, Evelyn knocked on his office door. He sat behind his desk, reviewing a chart on his screen. When he looked up, his eyes were as cold as ever. Ms. Carter, he said in his deep voice, what is it? Evelyn drew a breath, stepped forward, and placed the USB drive on his desk. Mr. West, I believe there's been a misunderstanding about something that happened at Lucielle. This is the surveillance footage from the night I took a Mandarin phone call. I'd like you to watch it. Julian frowned, clearly not expecting this. He picked up the USB and turned it over in his hand, as if weighing his options. A misunderstanding? He repeated, his tone tinged with skepticism. You think I have time for this? I hope you'll make time, Evelyn said steadily. If you've been doubting me, then I want you to see the truth. I didn't do anything wrong. He stared at her, his eyes dark and searching, as if trying to spot a lie. After a long pause, he gave a small nod. Fine, I'll watch it. Now get back to work. Evelyn nodded and left the office, her heart still racing. She didn't know if Julian would watch the video or toss it in the trash, but she had done what she needed to do. In his office, Julian inserted the USB into his laptop, suspicion still clouding his face. He didn't want to admit it, but Evelyn's quiet defiance intrigued him. He played the video and watched the faint images from Lucielle's hallway. Her voice, speaking Mandarin, was clear and controlled. He understood enough of the language to grasp the nature of the call. She was interpreting a conversation with customs. There were no secrets, no conspiracies, just a woman trying to help a friend. Julian replayed the clip, listening to every word. A knot twisted in his stomach, not because of Evelyn, but because of himself. He remembered that night, remembered ordering her termination without hesitation. He had let the scars of a past betrayal cloud his judgment, and now the truth stared him in the face. He shut the laptop and looked out the window, the Manhattan skyline sprawling below. For the first time in years, a flicker of guilt stirred in him. Evelyn wasn't a threat. She had been a casualty of his misplaced fear. He picked up his phone, intending to call Sarah and extend Evelyn's trial, but paused. He needed time to process this, to confront what he'd done. When Evelyn returned to her desk later that day, she found a short email from Julian. "Thank you for the video. We'll talk later." No apology, no explanation. But there was a shift in his tone, something less rigid, less cold. She tucked her laptop into her bag and left West Tech, unaware that her action today hadn't just cleared Julian's doubts, it had made him begin to see her in an entirely new light. Evelyn Carter stepped into her second week at West Tech with a completely different mindset. Since giving the surveillance footage to Julian West, she'd noticed a subtle shift in how he treated her. The sharp questions and suspicious stares had faded, replaced by more direct and purposeful assignments, almost as if he was now testing her capabilities rather than doubting her presence. She was assigned to assist with international negotiations, a role that required not only linguistic skills but emotional intelligence. Evelyn didn't just meet expectations, she exceeded them, and for the first time, she began to feel like she belonged here, even if only temporarily. Today, she sat in the 32nd floor conference room, preparing to live translate a video call with Nextech, a French tech company. Julian led the meeting, his voice low and assertive as he discussed collaboration on a new AI development system. Evelyn translated the words of Pierre Dubois, Nextech's CEO, an older man with a polished, restrained demeanor. She not only delivered an accurate translation, but subtly softened tense moments during pricing disputes. When Pierre mentioned a vague contract clause, Evelyn leaned toward Julian and quietly suggested, "Emphasize West Tech's long-term benefits to deflect." Julian nodded, applied it instantly, and the negotiation ended with a preliminary deal worth tens of millions. After the call, Tom, the project director, clapped her on the shoulder. "Ms. Carter, you just saved the team. Pierre is notoriously hard to sway." Evelyn smiled modestly, but her eyes inadvertently met Julian's from across the room. He didn't speak, just gave a small nod. But in that brief glance, something new flickered behind his eyes. Respect, perhaps. In the following days, Julian entrusted Evelyn with increasingly sensitive work. She translated complex contracts, participated in meetings with Asian partners, and even proposed alternative phrasing to persuade a Chinese firm to extend their partnership. Her skill wasn't just in language, but in reading people, something Julian, for all his intelligence and control, often lacked. He began to see Evelyn in a new light, not just a translator, but someone sincere, competent, and unexpectedly sharp. In rare moments, when she laughed with coworkers or patiently explained terminology to Mason, one of the company's junior techs, Julian saw a warmth in her he hadn't witnessed in a long time. Yet despite the improving dynamic between them, Evelyn kept her guard up. She knew Julian's past, the betrayal by a Chinese firm, the trust that had left him scarred. She also suspected he had been the one to orchestrate her firing at Luciel, though he'd never confirmed it. That truth made her wary, even as her heart fluttered at times when she glimpsed his loneliness. Like when he sat alone in his office, staring at the Manhattan skyline with distant eyes. One afternoon, while translating a series of internal emails from French, Evelyn stumbled upon something strange. The email was sent from an anonymous account to West Tech's CFO, Diane Reynolds. On the surface, it looked like a financial report. But between the lines, Evelyn spotted terminology that didn't match the ongoing projects. Off-market transactions, stock adjustment, and foreign investment fund. She frowned and reread the message. A French phrase, transfert discreet, was repeated multiple times, implying covert money transfers. Evelyn wasn't a financial expert, but her instincts told her this wasn't just a standard email. She saved the translation, printed a hard copy, and brought it to Julian's office. He was reviewing market charts when she knocked. He looked up as she entered, his tone still calm but no longer icy. "Ms. Carter," he said, "something important?" She placed the printout on his desk, pointing to the highlighted lines. "I translated this from the internal system. It was addressed to Ms. Reynolds, but the content, it's unusual. I think it might point to a scheme involving stock manipulation, possibly linked to an outside partner." Julian took the paper, skimming it at an impressive speed. His expression darkened, eyes sharp as steel. "Are you sure you didn't mistranslate?" he asked, voice tense. "I triple-checked," Evelyn said evenly. I'm no finance expert, but terms like covert transaction and stock adjustment don't show up in normal reports, and this came from an untraceable account. Julian fell silent, fingers tightening around the paper. He knew Diane Reynolds was a powerful figure at Westech, but he'd never fully trusted her. If the email was legitimate, it could signal an internal conspiracy, an attack reminiscent of the betrayal 3 years ago. But this time, he wasn't alone. "Keep this to yourself," he said, locking eyes with her. "Tell no one. Not Sarah, not Tom. Understand?" Evelyn nodded, feeling the weight of his words. "I understand. But if this is real, what do we do next?" Julian stood and walked to the window, hands in his pockets. "We investigate, quietly. If Diane is involved, she's not acting alone. And if they find out you uncovered this," he paused, his voice low, "you'll be in danger." Evelyn swallowed hard but didn't flinch. "I'll do what's necessary. Just tell me what you need from me." Julian turned back, his gaze laced with surprise and something else, admiration. "You're not afraid, Carter?" She gave a faint smile, though her pulse thundered. "I'm afraid, but I've lost too much already to back down now." In the days that followed, Julian and Evelyn launched a covert investigation. Julian instructed her to continue translating internal messages, watching for more clues, while he quietly examined Diane's trading history and her communications with foreign investors. They worked in silence, pretending everything was normal. In meetings, Evelyn remained professional, her translations flawless, while Julian maintained his signature stoicism. But after hours, they stayed late in the office, cross-referencing data and sharing theories. One evening, while they sat in an empty conference room, Julian suddenly said, "You remind me of someone I once trusted, and who betrayed me." He paused as if regretting the admission. "But you're different. You don't hide anything." Evelyn looked at him, surprised by the rare vulnerability. "I have nothing to hide, Mr. West. I just want to do what's right." He nodded, his voice softening. "Call me Julian." She smiled for the first time, feeling a thin, fragile thread forming between them. Something real. But she also knew, in this dangerous game, they weren't just fighting invisible enemies. They were facing their own old wounds. And if they weren't careful, this conspiracy could destroy everything. Rain poured down over Manhattan, turning the streets into glimmering rivers of neon light. Evelyn Carter ran across the underground parking garage of Westech, her heart pounding, breath ragged. Just minutes earlier, she and Julian had narrowly escaped a moment that left her blood running cold. They had been leaving the office after another late-night session, digging through evidence of the stock manipulation scheme, when a black SUV suddenly tore around a blind corner of the garage. Julian, reacting in a flash, had pulled her behind a concrete pillar just in time. The vehicle sped past, missing them by inches. The driver didn't stop, disappearing into the shadows, leaving Evelyn shaking with shock. "Are you okay?" Julian asked, his voice low but urgent, his hand still gripping her arm. In the dim light of the garage, his face was tense, eyes scanning the area like he expected the danger to return at any second. Evelyn nodded, but her legs felt weak beneath her. She couldn't speak, her mind still spinning from the image of that SUV barreling toward them. This hadn't been an accident. Someone had meant to send a message. And deep down, she knew it was tied to the email she had discovered, to the secret investigation she and Julian had been conducting. I'm fine," she whispered, though the tremble in her voice betrayed her. Julian looked at her, his gaze softening slightly. "Get in. I'll take you home." She didn't protest. They moved quickly to Julian's black Audi, the rain soaking their coats. Inside, the silence was thick, broken only by the pounding rain on the windshield and the steady hum of the engine. Evelyn hugged herself, trying to shake the lingering fear, but it clung to her like a shadow. Julian drove in silence, but she noticed the white-knuckle grip he had on the steering wheel. When they arrived at the aging apartment building in Brooklyn where Evelyn lived, the rain hadn't let up. She opened the car door, ready to step out, then paused, turning back to him. "Thank you for pulling me out of the way," she said softly, sincerely. "Would you like to come up for a cup of tea, just to calm down?" Julian hesitated, his gaze drifting across her face, as if weighing something. Then he nodded. All right. Her apartment was small, filled with old furniture and family photos on the walls. She turned on the lights, set the kettle on the stove, and gestured for him to take a seat on the worn sofa. He looked out of place here, his expensive suit a sharp contrast against the faded rug. Evelyn brewed 2 cups of chamomile tea, the calming scent filling the space, and sat down across from him. They sat in silence for a while, the rain tapping softly on the window. Then Julian spoke, his voice deep and slightly hoarse. Tonight, I shouldn't have kept you so late. If I'd been more careful, that wouldn't have happened. Evelyn shook her head. It wasn't your fault. We had no way of knowing they'd go that far. He looked at her, regret flickering in his eyes. Evelyn, I owe you an apology, not just for tonight, but for everything. For Lucielle, for doubting you, for making you lose your job. I let the past control me. She blinked, surprised by his honesty. The past? You mean the betrayal? Julian nodded, his hands tightening around the tea mug. He told her the story, his voice steady but filled with emotion, about the deal with the Chinese firm 3 years ago, about the friend he had trusted like family, who had stolen Westtech's AI data and sold it, about the $200 million loss, about the trust that was shattered. I thought I was protecting myself, he said, but all I did was build walls. And you got caught in the fallout. Evelyn listened, her chest aching. She understood loss. She knew what it was to give up everything for someone you love. I gave things up too, she said quietly. I used to dream of being a language professor, living in Paris or Beijing, teaching, writing, living a quiet life. But when my mom got cancer, I gave it all up. My scholarship, my research, everything. Now I just try to keep her here with me as long as I can. Julian looked at her, his expression gentler than she had ever seen. You're stronger than I thought, Evelyn. I haven't trusted anyone in years, until I met you. The words pierced her, painful and beautiful all at once. Her eyes stung, but she didn't look away. She reached out, placing her hand over his, feeling the warmth of his skin. I'm scared too, Julian, but I believe we can get through this, together. He looked at her hand, then met her gaze. For a moment, time seemed to stop. He leaned in, and so did she, as if pulled by something neither could resist. Their lips met in a kiss that was both soft and urgent, as if they were both searching for something to hold on to in the storm. The kiss deepened, filled with unspoken fear, hope, and a connection stronger than either of them had expected. When they pulled away, Evelyn was breathless, her cheeks flushed. Julian smiled, the first real smile she had ever seen from him. But then his expression grew serious again. We're not safe yet, Evelyn. Tonight was a warning. I'll protect you, I swear it. She gripped his hand tighter and nodded. I know, and I'm not backing down. Are you still following the story? Please leave your thoughts on the story in the comments below. All your comments are the motivation for us to create better stories. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Thank you very much. The ambush in the parking garage had changed everything. Julian and Evelyn now knew that the person behind the stock manipulation scheme wasn't just operating in the shadows. They were willing to do anything to protect their secrets. But instead of backing down, the two of them decided to move faster. They had to unmask the traitor before another attack came. Julian called Evelyn into his office the next morning, closed the door, and pulled the blinds shut to ensure no one could listen in. We need to act quickly, he said, voice low but firm. If Diane Reynolds is involved, she has allies on the executive team. We need a trap. Evelyn nodded, already mentally prepared. What kind of trap? How do we expose who's pulling the strings? Julian gave a faint, sharp smile. We'll leak false information, something sensitive enough to force the traitor's hand. I'll send out an internal email claiming we've discovered suspicious transactions and are launching an investigation. But I'll include one deliberate false detail, and only a few people will receive it. Whoever acts on that fake detail, that's our mole. Evelyn was impressed by the strategy's precision, but didn't hesitate to agree. Together, they drafted the email, inserting a fake reference to a Swiss investment fund that didn't exist. They sent it to three key suspects: Diane Reynolds, the chief operating officer, and a senior financial advisor. Evelyn translated the message into French to simulate that it had also been sent to an international partner, adding realism to the deception. Over the next 2 days, they waited, pretending nothing had changed. Evelyn kept translating documents and attending meetings, while Julian monitored every financial transaction through a secure surveillance system. The tension made it hard to sleep, but whenever Evelyn looked at Julian, she found the strength to keep going. He was no longer the cold, untouchable CEO she once feared. He was her partner, someone willing to stand in harm's way for her. By the third day the trap had sprung, Julian received an alert from the cybersecurity team. An anonymous account had attempted to move a large volume of Westech shares through an investment fund in Geneva, the exact detail planted in the fake email. Julian immediately traced the digital fingerprints, and all signs pointed directly to Diane Reynolds. But they needed irrefutable evidence. Julian installed an audio surveillance device in the boardroom where Diane often met with advisors. Evelyn, fluent in French, was tasked with analyzing a voicemail Diane had left during a call with a foreign contact. She sat in Julian's office, headphones on, listening intently. Diane's voice, calm but calculated, revealed plans to sell insider information to a French hedge fund in exchange for an enormous commission. Evelyn transcribed and translated every word, her notes meticulous. When she finished, she handed the report to Julian. "This is the key," she said confidently. "She's not just manipulating stocks. She's planning to crash Westech's value for personal gain." Julian read the document, his eyes blazing with focus. "You did great, Evelyn. Now we finish this." They called an emergency board meeting under the pretense of addressing a financial crisis. When Diane walked in, calm and composed as always, Julian played the recording. Her voice echoed through the room, unmistakable. Her face paled, but she still tried to deny it, until Julian presented the forged transaction data and traced IP logs. The rest of the board sat in stunned silence. And then, without further discussion, Diane was escorted out by security, pending a full legal investigation. After the meeting, Julian turned to Evelyn, gratitude softening his usually guarded expression. "You didn't just save the company, Evelyn. You saved me, again." She smiled, though her heart remained heavy. They had won, but the cost of victory was another scar, another weight carried between them, and a question hung unspoken in the air. Were they finally safe, or was this just the beginning? Camera flashes exploded outside Westech's headquarters, turning Friday afternoon's press conference into a chaotic media spectacle. Julian West stood at the podium in a deep navy suit, his voice calm and commanding as it echoed through the microphone, announcing the company's triumph over an internal stock manipulation scheme. Headlines had flooded the internet all morning. Westech turns the tables, CFO arrested for insider trading. Julian West saves company from collapse. But what stunned the crowd most was the moment Julian mentioned an unexpected name. "I want to thank someone who played a crucial role in uncovering this scheme," Julian said, his gaze sweeping over the press. "She's a temporary employee, someone who never sought recognition, but her intelligence and dedication saved Westech. Evelyn Carter, she's the real hero." Applause broke out, but Evelyn, standing off to the side of the room, felt her chest tighten. She had no desire to be in the spotlight. When Julian gestured for her to step forward, she offered only a faint smile, shook her head slightly, and stepped back. She wore a simple blue dress, her hair tied back, trying to disappear into the crowd of employees. But the reporters noticed. Cameras turned toward her, and within minutes, her name was splashed across online articles. Evelyn Carter, the mystery woman behind Westech's victory. After the press conference, Westech's office buzzed with congratulations and curiosity. Co-workers surrounded Evelyn, Tom, Mason, and others, eager to ask about her role in the investigation. She gave short answers, thanked them politely, but inside all she wanted was to leave. The attention felt suffocating. She had done the right thing, uncovered the email, translated the incriminating recording, helped Julian expose Diane Reynolds. But she never wanted to be the center of anything. All she wished for was to return to her mother and live a quiet life, far from schemes and danger. That afternoon, Julian found her in the break room, sitting alone with a cold cup of tea. He stood in the doorway, hands in his pockets, eyes softer than usual. "Hiding out in here?" he asked with a hint of teasing. Evelyn offered a weak smile. "I'm not great with crowds, and I don't want to be seen as a hero. I was just doing my job." Julian sat across from her, his gaze sincere. "You did more than that, Evelyn. You saved the company, and maybe me too. I want you to know I'm grateful." She looked at him, feeling the weight in his voice, but she also felt a distance, not between them, but between the life she longed for and the world he inhabited. "Thank you, Julian, but I need time to think. About staying here. About everything." He nodded, not surprised, though his eyes dimmed slightly. "I understand, but before you decide, I'd like to do one thing. Would you let me come with you to visit your mother? I'd like to meet the woman who raised someone like you." Evelyn blinked, caught off guard. She hesitated, then nodded. "Okay, she'd like that." That evening, Julian drove Evelyn to St. Luke's Hospital, where her mother, Margaret, was receiving treatment. The rain had stopped, but the air was still damp, filled with the scent of earth and grass. In the hospital room, Margaret lay in bed, her silver hair thin, but her eyes lit up when she saw Evelyn. "Sweetheart," she said, her voice weak but warm, "you're earlier than I expected." Evelyn took her hand and smiled. "I wanted you to meet someone. This is Julian West, my boss." Julian stepped forward and bowed slightly. "It's a pleasure to meet you, ma'am. I've heard so much about you from Evelyn." Margaret studied him with a mischievous glint in her eyes. "So you're the one keeping my daughter at the office late? But you seem all right. Sit down." They chatted, and to Evelyn's surprise, Julian was more open than she'd ever seen him. He spoke about West Tech, the early startup days, and even cracked a joke about nearly burning down his kitchen while trying to cook. Margaret laughed heartily, and for a rare moment, Evelyn felt light. She watched Julian and felt grateful. He wasn't just the powerful CEO everyone feared. He was someone willing to step into her small world, just to bring her mother joy. As they left the hospital, Evelyn and Julian stood in the parking lot, the moon casting their shadows long across the pavement. She turned to him, her voice quiet but firm. "Julian, I think I'm going to leave West Tech when my contract ends. I need to be with my mom. I need a simpler life." Julian was silent for a moment, studying her as if memorizing every detail of her face. "I won't try to stop you, Evelyn. You deserve to live the life you want. But if you ever change your mind, West Tech will always have a place for you." She smiled, eyes stinging with emotion. "Thank you for everything." He stepped closer, gently touching her shoulder, his eyes filled with words he didn't say. "You changed me, Evelyn. Don't forget that." They parted in silence, but as Evelyn stepped into the hospital elevator to return to her mother, she felt a sweet ache in her chest. Julian hadn't asked her to stay, but the look he gave her, deep, tender, and full of longing, was a promise that their story wasn't over. In the days that followed, the media continued to mention Evelyn, but she declined all interviews. She returned to her Brooklyn apartment, spending her days with her mother, reading aloud and sharing lighthearted stories from West Tech. But every night, when she sat alone, her thoughts drifted to Julian, the kiss in the rain, the look in his eyes at the hospital, and the loneliness he masked behind that calm exterior. She knew she had made the right choice, but part of her still lingered at West Tech, as if she'd left a piece of herself behind. And Julian, in his office high above Manhattan, couldn't stop thinking about her either. He reread the last translation Evelyn had left behind, her handwriting neat, her phrasing precise. He knew she needed time and space, and he respected that. But as he stared out over the city skyline, he made himself a quiet vow. One day he would find her again, not to bring her back, but to say everything he hadn't had the chance to say. A month had passed since Evelyn Carter left West Tech, and Manhattan had shifted with the season. The cold November wind swept through Brooklyn, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and hints of the approaching holidays. Evelyn spent most of her time with her mother, Margaret, who had been discharged from the hospital and was now undergoing outpatient care. Her health had gradually stabilized, though she still required regular attention. Evelyn had taken a part-time job at a local library, shelving books and helping children learn to read. The work wasn't glamorous, but it gave her the peace she had longed for after the whirlwind days at West Tech. Still, in quiet moments, sitting by the window of her small apartment, watching the rain fall, Evelyn couldn't help but think of Julian West, the kiss in the rain, the look in his eyes when they parted at the hospital, and the words he'd said, "You changed me, Evelyn," lingered in her memory. She often wondered how he was, if he still sat alone in that high-rise office, or if he had somehow found a way to heal the wounds of the past. She hadn't reached out, not because she didn't want to, but because she was afraid that doing so would pull them both back into a world she'd fought to step away from. But fate, as always, had its own plans. One afternoon, Evelyn received an email from Sarah Nguyen, the HR director at West Tech. The subject line was simple: invitation to grand opening event. The message explained that West Tech was launching a new branch in San Francisco, and the leadership team wanted Evelyn to speak on the power of language in building trust. Evelyn frowned, scrolling through the message. She had left West Tech. She had turned away from the spotlight. Why were they inviting her now? She called her mother to tell her about the email. Margaret, sitting in her armchair knitting, smiled knowingly. "Sweetheart, maybe they don't just want to hear about language. Maybe someone there misses you." Evelyn blushed, shaking her head. "Mom, I don't think that's it. Julian, he has the whole world on his plate. He doesn't have time for me." Margaret raised an eyebrow, her eyes gleaming. "Then go. Find out for yourself. You've got nothing to lose." After a few days of thought, Evelyn agreed to attend. She told herself it was a chance to close the West Tech chapter properly, to thank people like Sarah and Tom, and to face Julian one last time, if he happened to be there. The event was held at a grand conference center in Manhattan, lit in warm golden tones, with giant screens flashing the West Tech logo. Evelyn wore a knee-length teal silk dress, simple but elegant, highlighting her natural beauty. As she stepped into the hall, she felt the eyes of hundreds, West Tech employees, partners, and press. She kept her composure, offering polite smiles as Sarah welcomed her and guided her to the VIP section. The evening began with a speech from Tom, now director of the new branch. He spoke about West Tech's vision, innovation, and the power of trust. Then it was Evelyn's turn. She stepped up to the podium, heart pounding, but her voice rang clear as she spoke of how language connects people, dissolves suspicion, and builds lasting relationships. "Language isn't just words," she said. "It's sincerity. When we speak with truth, we build trust, and trust is the foundation of every lasting success." Applause erupted as she concluded. She stepped off the stage, relieved, until she saw him. Julian West stood at the back of the hall, his eyes locked on hers. He wore a black suit, still exuding quiet power, but something about him had changed. Softer, closer. He approached her, and before she could say a word, he held out a bouquet of white daisies, her favorite flower. "Evelyn," he said, voice low and warm, "you were right. Language is sincerity, and there's something I want to say to you, sincerely, in front of everyone." Evelyn blinked, her heart racing. The room fell quiet, all eyes on them. Julian took a deep breath, never looking away from her. "That phone call in Mandarin nearly drove us apart. But in the end, it led me to you, the woman who made me believe in the future again, who made me believe in love." Tears welled in Evelyn's eyes. Julian stepped closer and pulled a small box from his pocket, opening it to reveal a simple, glimmering ring. "Evelyn Carter, I can't promise you the whole world, but I promise to spend my whole world making you happy. Will you let me be a part of your peaceful one?" Cheers and applause erupted around them, but Evelyn heard nothing except the thudding of her own heart. Tears streamed down her cheeks, but she smiled through them and nodded. "Yes, Julian, I will." He slid the ring onto her finger, drew her into his arms, and they kissed amid the thunder of clapping. The kiss wasn't just a promise, it was healing, for his old scars, for her losses, and for a future they would now build together. Later that night, Evelyn and Julian stood on a balcony overlooking the city, glittering in the glow of thousands of lights. She leaned against his shoulder, warmed by his presence. "You know," she whispered, "I used to think we'd never get past the past. Julian kissed her forehead, smiling. But we did. Because of you, I learned to believe again. They stood in silence, hand in hand, gazing at the skyline. Their story had begun with a misunderstanding, a Mandarin phone call in a crowded restaurant. But now it had become a new journey, one of love, trust, and the happiness that lay ahead.